the cup and the league all to be won. Everyone knows there's a job to be done, and with a team so fine, I'm proud they're mine. We'll be singing this song. For real bars from Dunfermline have played it, and now we are on song. For real bars from Dunfermline have played it, and we'll go marching on.
The Dunfermline Athletic Former Players Association podcast is sponsored by Starnut Apparel, affordable and stylish clothing born on the terraces. Visit their website, Instagram, Twitter and Facebook.
Welcome to episode 8 of the Dunfermline Athletic Former Players Association podcast, Walking Down the Holbeath Road, where we will reminisce about yesteryear and the players who've been lucky enough to wear the famous black and white stripes. I'm your host, Mikey Mutkiewicz, and on this episode we speak to a former player whose career in the game spanned 26 years. Signing for Dunfermline from Clydebank in March 1988 for a then club record fee of £85,000, he would play 106 times for the Pars, including winning the 1988-89 First Division Championship. So sit back, grab a Bovril and enjoy this one with Davie Irons.
And John Watson, the flick to Davie Irons, the breakthrough! And a goal fit to win a championship. The midfielder Davie Irons, and the Dunfermline fans delighted. The build-up was neat, and the key flick was this one here by John Watson, finding Irons, a powerful shot that's always going away from Kennedy.
So thanks for joining us on this podcast, Davie. You had, as we've said in the intro, 26 years playing career in Scottish football. But first and foremost, how are you doing?
I'm good, Michael. I am living life quietly, working and living in Dumfries area. So I'm all good. I think kids, I've got 3 kids. They're all grown up, but no, I'm doing fine, thanks.
Good man. So you mentioned Dumfries there, so we'll start right at the beginning. You were born in Glasgow in 1961, but you moved to Dumfries and you pretty much grew up there. So just tell us a little bit about your childhood and your upbringing in Dumfries.
Yeah, well, I moved down in, I think it was about 1964, 65, around about then. My mum and dad moved down to Dumfries. My dad, he was an engineer. He got a job in the ICI factory, which was a massive employer in this part of the world. So we all moved down and had all my school years, both primary and secondary. Happy school years in Dumfries Academy. So there's a number of ex-players from Dunfermline that lived in the area at the time, and mentioned Graham Robertson as one, Ian McCall. Ian's older brother Gordon was one of my best friends. We grew up together, and Ian would be tagging along occasionally, being that wee bit younger. So
superb.
My life just revolved around playing football, either with the school or with local boys team that we played with, and a lot of happy memories.
Brilliant. And you speak about obviously football at a young age. What I take it, as a young boy, your dream was to be a professional footballer, or what? And what was your kind of background in youth football down in Dumfries?
I think all I ever wanted to do was kick a ball, and at the early age, I think everybody dreamt about being a professional footballer, but that was something I never really thought about too seriously. I just loved kicking a ball about. So the school, as they were in those days, that was the main focus of being a football. Best thing was to get into the school team first and foremost. That was a big kick, getting picked for the school team, and then there was a boys' club in Dumfries, which is still going, Greyston Rovers, which is a huge part of the boys' football in Dumfries. They produced a lot of good players over the years. They were the kind of the weekend stuff. After the school football on the Saturday, you'd play with the boys' team on a Sunday. So, a lot of good players, as I say. I mentioned one or two already. Ted McMinn, who was played for Rangers. Ted played alongside us at Greyston Rovers. Kevin Hetherington, who's unfortunately come to a wee bit of publicity recently with his diagnosis of having Alzheimer's. Kevin played for Ayr United and Queen of the South for a long time. So, yeah, a lot of good players from this part of the world.
Great. And you mentioned Queen of the South there. You get your opportunity in 1979 to sign for your hometown club. Did you have other opportunities to sign for professional clubs, or was Queen of the South the only one at that point?
I was a late developer. I was tiny. When I was 16 years old, I was still only 5'2". So I was told I was always too wee. That was the excuses. But yeah, I played with Queens just to the end of my school years, 6th year at school, and I think I played about 4 games in the first team. But my mum and dad at that time had instilled that I needed an education, and I decided to go to university. So I left Queens and went down to Newcastle and had spent 3 years down there doing a sports degree.
Superb. See, at that point, were you frustrated? Did you have it in your mind that I'm going to be a footballer, and then all of a sudden that's kind of taken away from you, or was football just a bonus thing for you?
I think at that time I was quite single-minded. I'd got 4 games in the first team, and then they had that pre-season before I went to uni. I thought they'd promised me games in the pre-season friendlies, and it never happened. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to uni instead. So I just say, right, I'll see you later. I was only signed as an amateur. I wasn't a pro at that time. And like I say, my mum and dad encouraged me to look to education, get a degree, and then you can always come back to the football. But I never really thought it that way. I just thought, you know what, I'll just go and see what happens. Went down to university. Sorry, hi.
On you go, yeah. Down in Newcastle.
Down to Newcastle, and I think, to be honest, when I look back, that's probably what gave me the chance to become a footballer, because I went to uni and became a full-time footballer at uni, believe it or not. I did a sports degree. I played every Wednesday for the uni, a Saturday for South non-league teams in the Northern League, and then a Sunday morning played in a very competitive pub league in Newcastle, which they paid you on a Sunday morning to play. So that subsidised my grant I was getting for university. So I was playing 3 times a week, and it was brilliant. I don't know how I managed to get my studies fitted in with my football, but it was. To this day, I still think that's how I became a footballer.
And then in 1984, you get the move back up the road to Ayr United, where you would make 75 appearances, scoring 12 goals. So by that point, did you think, maybe I can make it in the game?
Yeah, I'd had a couple of trials. I'd been down at Blackpool and Hibs, and I thought I did okay in both, but nothing really came of any of them. But then I got a chance. I went for a trial at Ayr United, and it was a manager called George Caldwell, played in a reserve game at Airdrie, and I must have done well enough because he asked me to sign after the game. So that was a start, and I thought Ayr United was a good level. There was only 3 leagues in those days, so we're in League One or Championship, 1 league below the Premier, and I thought that's a good level to start with. And it was a good club. They'd just sold Stevie Nicol to Liverpool. Alan McInally had just gone to Celtic. I thought Robert Connor had gone to Dundee. So there was good players that had moved on. I thought they had a good reputation at that point of having a really good youth set-up and developing players. So, yeah, I thought, give it a go. And I combined that with, I managed to get a job in the sports industry in a local sports centre. So I combined that with my football, and I thought, well, I've got a start. Let's see where it goes.
Yeah, and then it went to Clydebank. In 1987, you signed for Clydebank. So by that point, did you have other clubs interested in you, or Clydebank the best option at that time?
Well, at Ayr, I remember the manager at Ayr, after the end of my first season, had said that Celtic wanted to sign me, but they'd agreed to leave me for another season at Ayr. And it's the story of my life. I think it was Davie Hay got sacked, so that was that. But believe it or not, when I signed with Clydebank, some of the people listening might not remember, but they were actually a Premier League team when I signed for Clydebank, albeit part-time. They were in the Premier League, and it was
amazing.
They were a brilliant little club. I mean, the Steedman family ran the club, and they were probably a bit before their time because they didn't have a manager as such. They had a first-team coach, and Jack Steedman and his brothers, they picked the team, picked players, signed players, and Sam Henderson, who was a coach, he just basically trained us and took the team on a Saturday. But I'm quite sure you'll know yourself that the number of players that Clydebank produced over the years was amazing.
Yeah,
they signed me for £18,000, and then I know we're going to come on to when I moved to Dunfermline, but I signed for Dunfermline for £85,000.
Yeah.
So they made in 2 years they've made nearly £70,000 profit, and it's no bad for a wee club like Clydebank.
Definitely. It's a shame what ended up happening to them, wasn't it? The late 90s.
Yeah, it was. And actually, I went back to after I'd left St Johnstone, but I went back to Clydebank for the last kind of a season and a bit. And at that point, they were selling. Kilbowie had been sold. They were playing out at Dumbarton's old ground. And you could just tell the writing was on the wall there.
Yeah, a shame. You mentioned obviously the Pars, so we're about to move on to that. So 54 appearances for Clydebank, and then the opportunity to join Big Jim Leishman at Dunfermline. So how did that all come about?
Well, it was probably, looking back at that point, it was the best I'd been playing at Clydebank, and I'd been down at Coventry on trial, and they wanted to sign me. And they'd just won the FA Cup the previous year. So they were quite a relatively big club. I'd been down there, again, rumours of other teams, but nothing really was happening. And until I got a phone call. I remember sitting at my work one night, it was a Sunday night, I got a phone call, and it was Jack Steedman saying that Jim Leishman wanted to speak to you. He's given permission to speak to you. And I thought, finally something might happen, because I'd never been full-time in all my prior to that time, and I wanted to be a full-time footballer. In fact, I'd considered joining the police because I wasn't getting anywhere in terms of the football. Well, I didn't think I was getting anywhere. I was just playing part-time, and I thought my career in this, working in a sports centre, was getting in the road of my football, and it was just becoming a bit... I was at a crossroads, but it came at a good time, and Leish phoned me up. And Leish being Leish, as we all know, just incredible guy, so much respect for him, and he probably made me a very happy man in terms of offering me a chance to go full time and sign with Dunfermline. So,
yeah. Can you remember what Jim said to you to try and to lure you to the club?
Some of the things he said, you would laugh. I mean, I actually agreed to come through and to have a chat with him and have a look around. And I remember turning up at East End Park, and he was I think he must have been in his office. I had to wait for 5 minutes or so. But anyway, he came out, and Leish being big, the big handshake, the big hugs, and says, "Come on, I'll show you the new training ground that we're going to be building." And he took me up to what used to be a golf driving range.
Yeah.
And it was the pitch. Well, it wasn't even a football pitch. I think they just put a couple of goals up. It was just a long grass, up and down, just an old field, basically. And he says, "This is going to be one of the best training facilities in Europe." And I'm like, "All right." Try to envisage this training facility that never really happened. But
yeah,
it wasn't so much what he said, Mike. It was just his enthusiasm and his desire to make Dunfermline a success and compete with he wanted to compete with the big boys in the Premier League.
Yeah.
And I just fell for it, and I just fell in love with the club. I just took me onto the pitch. Aye, and I'm not embarrassed to admit that. I fell in love with the club and everything about it, and I still to this day have such fond memories of my time at Dunfermline.
Well, we'll obviously touch on that and the magic Big Leish created at Dunfermline during that time. But speaking of Eagle Glen, now we're working on a little podcast special regarding Eagle Glen. What is your memories of the facility and using the facility? Because it's one of these, there's no pictures exist of it there's very little information on it, but from the research we've done, Jim used it, like you said, in his promotional chat to lure players to the club. And it never really come to anything, did it?
It didn't, but you know what it did have? It was a base that the players, we were away from East End Park, so we're away up. I think Dunfermline's grown to such an extent it's probably a housing estate now, but at that time it seemed quite remote. It was outside the town, and it was like we could just relax up there. And there was the changing rooms with a pool table. You know, we had just an area where we could sit and eat a lunch, albeit we had a couple of old boys used to come up and make us rolls and stuff. But it was just a place that we just bonded. And I think, to be honest, that was probably one of the best things Leish did at that time, was get us up there, and we bonded like I've never experienced before. And the characters that were Big Norrie, John Watson, Ray Farningham, Raymond Sharp, Big Westy, you know, the list, I could go on, Bobby Smith. It was just incredible. And we would just all sit in these, either the changing room or the kind of pool room, and we just got on so well as a group. And that definitely had such a bearing on ultimately the success that we had with Leish.
Yeah.
You know?
So going back to join the club, it was a club record fee at the time, 85,000 on the 2nd of March 1988. Do you remember your debut just a couple of days later?
I do. It was against, was it Rangers or Celtic? I think it was Celtic.
Celtic, yeah.
Celtic at East, because I know we played Rangers on the Saturday. So my first two games were Celtic and then Rangers. And I was thrown in at the deep end, which, why not? I was a record signing, as you said. And
how did you find that, David? Was that a massive step up? Was it a struggle, or?
I think the two, obviously you're playing against two of the best teams in Scotland, so it was always a struggle whenever you played Rangers or Celtic. But I know we lost both games, but I didn't think we didn't let ourselves down. Although I think there was only 10 games left when I signed, so we were on the verge of going down, if not officially down at that point. But
yeah,
I think Leish had obviously accepted at that point that we're probably going to go down, but he was looking to build and make sure we came straight back up. But
yeah,
it was, having played Premier League with Clydebank, albeit it was only for maybe 3/4 of a season, I hadn't really experienced it that much. So it was a challenge, and it was a tough challenge against these really good teams. But
yeah,
it was where I wanted to test myself and where I wanted to play, and you know, and I thought, you just have to get on with it. You know, you've signed. I was delighted to have signed. I think the record fee was, I never really thought about that. It wasn't until later on that somebody said, I think Leish had said to me I was a record signing, and thought, what an honour that is.
Yeah, until a certain Istvan Kozma comes to the club, which we'll touch on.
Istvan, he blew me out of the water with that one.
just a little bit. Like you mentioned, we unfortunately got relegated that year, but the following season was 88-89. Which was a good season for the club. So we're back in the first division, and obviously we're gunning for promotion to get back to the Premier League. That season you played 41 games, and the club won 22 out of 39. Now I wanted to start on that pre-season. There was an away trip to Bordeaux. If you've got any stories about that one, because I've heard a few from Big Leish.
Aye, well, it was again, what an experience. You know, I thought I'd hit the big time. I think we all did. We all, apart from some of the lads who'd played at like Dundee United, Stuart Beattie, John Holt, Bobby Smith, they'd obviously played at the highest level. They'd probably experienced things like that. But a lot of us never been abroad with a team to play. And I think obviously we went to Bordeaux, and ultimately resulted in that link between Bordeaux and Dunfermline and George and Istvan signing. But prior to that, when we were going, typical, with the air traffic control strike, so we had to, instead of flying straight to Bordeaux, we ended up getting trains, planes and automobiles. So we went Edinburgh to London, London to the Dover, then the ferry across. That was funny. Old Joe Nelson, that was hilarious. The old kit man, rest in peace, Joe. But Joe got seasick going across in the ferry. The boys were all sitting inside in one of the restaurant areas, and poor Joe was sitting outside being sick. And all I can remember is the boys knocking the window offering Joe pies or sandwiches. Every time he looked up, he just went and threw up again. But no, the trip was a great experience. But the funniest thing I remember is actually when we came back, and Jim Leishman had a team meeting to apologise. He said, "Listen, lads, I know it wasn't what we thought. It was the travelling wasn't great." And then he said, "But the biggest disappointment for me was it was $2.50 a pint, lads." And Leish's old imitable style, and his Fife accent is $2.50 a pint. And the boys are like looking at each other and said, "Really? Did he say that?" And he repeated it, and it was like, that just sums Leish up. He was just trying to make the most of what had been a tough week's travel and stuff, but he just tried to make it a laugh and a joke. But no, it was a really good experience, although we got battered. I think it was 6-0 by Bordeaux. Yeah. Travelling on it. They had an air-conditioned coach because we had to travel a couple of hours to the game. They were all sitting in the air-conditioned coach, and we were sitting in this, I think it was a service bus with no air conditioning. Boys were sitting in their shorts with their shirts off. It was absolutely roasting hot. Not ideal for a game.
No, not the best preparation, is it?
No, but it was, he just took it, just accepted it.
Brilliant, mate. And then, like I said, that was a really good season. We're gunning for promotion. And then towards the end of that season, a game up at Station Park, you score an absolute belter. What's your memories of that one?
I remember, obviously, the goal's still probably one of the highlights. I'd like to tell people that was a goal that won us promotion, but it wasn't really. We still had a couple of games left, but I think it gave us that wee bit of breathing space. We weren't firing all cylinders. I think we'd got good results, but we hadn't been playing consistently well. But and Forfar was always a difficult place to go in those days. And I remember I'd actually hurt my shoulder a couple of weeks previously, because I don't know if you remember the celebrations. I've only actually put one arm up. I wasn't doing my Alan Shearer impressions. It was because my left arm was still a bit stiff from being injured. So I'd usually put both arms up to celebrate, but I only put the one arm. But no, that was a big win for us, a huge win. It meant we had 2 home games left, Clyde and Meadowbank. Yeah. And we only needed 2 points over the 2 games to win promotion. So
yeah. And we kind of stumbled the following week against Clyde, didn't we? And then
we did. I remember we were kind of winning 1-0, but it wasn't a great game. And then Clyde got a bizarre goal, which I think Big Westdale to this day will tell you he was fouled, but he's kind of caught the ball and he's kind of stumbled back, and the referee's given it. So we stuttered a wee bit. We'd all liked to have got the job done, obviously, that day, but it meant we had another week. I remember that the week of that Meadowbank game it was so stressful. I remember you could just feel the tension building, and because we were so close to getting over the line, and obviously we didn't do it against Clyde, so that the week leading up to it was just really stressful. And I think a few of us probably didn't sleep as well as we had, and I'm sure Leish took us to, I think we stayed overnight at a hotel before the actual game against Meadowbank. Got us all together at Airth Castle, I think it was, just to try and get us together and try and relax. But I think that added to the stress, to be honest. But the Saturday turning up at East End Park, I think it was 12,000, whatever it was, against a team who brought nobody. Let's be honest, it was purely Dunfermline fans. And we'll probably go. That'll be the next question, probably. What I remember about
what's your memories of that day, and then following on from that, the celebrations that evening? Well, if you can remember much.
The celebrations were something to behold. The game itself wasn't great. It wasn't great. But when I look back, I remember walking out onto the pitch with the team, and I looked at Norrie McCarthy, Ian Westwater, and particularly John Watson, and I thought, and Ross Jack, I thought, we'll win. We'll get promotion, because we've got these characters are going to make sure we get up. And sure, I know Norrie's God rest his soul. But Norrie was such a leader, such an influence. Never said aye. And I remember him saying before the game, "We'll get promoted. Don't worry about it." Because I think you could see in my eyes, I was like, "Oh, what if we blow this?" But him and John were obviously big pals, and it was so fitting that Winker scored the goal that got us promoted, because that guy is just such a legend, along with his best pal. The two of them have played such a huge part in my time at Dunfermline, but also I think in the history of the club.
Yeah,
I don't think these two guys will ever be replaced, and that's no disrespect to anyone else that's been before or after, but I think these two guys they made Dunfermline for me. They were the kind of guys who loved the club, they lived in the area, they just eat, drank and slept Dunfermline, and it was just such an honour to be able to play with the two of them.
You mentioned they two characters. What other characters were at the club at that point, Davie?
I think, as I said to you before, that the bond that Leish created, he just seemed to be able to pick the right type of people to come to the club. And Ray Farningham, who's still to this day one of my best friends, Ray joined the club, and there was three of them that used to travel from Dundee: Ray, Ross Jack, and Stuart Rafferty. They were another three guys who were just brilliant to have around. They were laugh a minute, they were joking, but they were really good footballers, good professionals. Ian Westwater, I know West had a couple of spells at the club. He was another one who just loved the club, and I thought he was a brilliant goalkeeper. And I know Andy Rhodes came and maybe kind of pushed that Ian out the number one spot, but Westy was another great character. But there's a Bobby Smith, who's unfortunately not with us, Graham Robertson, and there's another lad that I travelled with every day who became really close. I mean, I've never heard from him, I've never seen him. Raymond Sharpie, who's absolutely as daft as a brush, but a really good football player.
Ray Sharp, someone we've been trying to find for a long time through the Former Players Association, and we just cannot locate him. Nobody knows where he is. Nobody's heard from him. So
I've never heard from him either. I remember somebody did say to me, I can't remember when and where, but thought he was in the London area. But Sharpie was one of these. He had everything. At that time, he got a Scotland cap, the under-21s.
Yeah,
and he was strong. He was quick. He was left-sided, and him and I played on that left side together. And regardless of travelling together, we had a decent kind of relationship on the pitch as well as off the park. And I'd love to catch up with him, but like you say, nobody seems to know where he is. But
well, if we can find him, Davie, we'll let you know. Another player I wanted to chat about from that season, and unfortunately, we had tragedy that following summer, was Gary Riddle. What was your memories of Gary?
Gary was, again, he moved down from Aberdeen, and a player that he really took to the area. He lived locally. He liked a night out, Gary. I remember Gary used to preen himself in front of the mirror after training. Brilliant guy. And I can remember to this day the news. I was actually on holiday in San Francisco, of all places, and I got a phone call from my mother to say if she'd heard the news that Gary had died and collapsed during a half marathon. And it was absolute. I couldn't believe it. I mean, 21-year-old, I think, 22 maybe, 21, 22, fit as a fiddle. He was a real prospect. I think Gary had been an under 18 Scotland cap or something, youth cap anyway.
Correct.
And Aberdeen, as they were in the 80s and the 90s, they were a big club. And Gary took that chance to leave a huge club, which must have been difficult for him to leave his home area and come down to Dunfermline. But who knows what Gary could have achieved in his playing career? But he was just starting to establish himself beside Norrie, and obviously the tragedy occurred, and it really was heartbreaking. And as I'm sure we'll probably speak about again, it wasn't the first. It wasn't the first to lose in my time at Dunfermline, or my time after that as well. But
yeah, well, the following season, 89-90, the club do return to the Premier League, and everything really seems to be on the up. You make 32 appearances that year, and the average home gate rises to 10,978. What I wanted to start with was, did you notice the real progression starting that summer with your likes of George O'Boyle and Doug Rugvay, Stuart Rafferty, obviously Istvan Kozma following, like real star players start to come into the club?
yeah, and I think it was being the first kind of time I'd been full time. When you're part time, you kind of got used to the turnover of players at a part time club, but when you went full time, I remember thinking it was quite difficult to lose some of the players that you'd been with every day, throughout the season. But you're right. I think the club obviously sent a message out about wanting to compete at the top level, and for obvious reasons they had to better the squad. And you're right, they brought in some experience. George was just potentially, if it hadn't been for his injury, I think George would have played at a higher level than he did. Istvan, well, I think everybody knows the Dunfermline fans what we think of Istvan. Brilliant guy, quite a funny guy. I think he knew a lot more than he let on, but talented footballer. And we used to laugh about, we did all the work and Istvan got all the glory, but he deserved it. He was just such a talent. But yeah, when you started seeing players like that coming into the club, you upped your game, because you either went with it or you'd get left behind. And obviously some players left, as I said, but I was desperate. I wanted to stay at the club. I loved every minute I was there. I know I'd had probably been in and out of the team that following season, but it was to be part of a club that was getting good, big crowds, competing. I mean, we beat Celtic and we beat Rangers, and I remember pushing Aberdeen every time. We were never battered by anyone really that I can remember. I know obviously we lost to Rangers in the cup tie, but we were always competing against, in those days, Rangers, Celtic, Hearts, Hibs, Aberdeen, Dundee United. They all had teams full of international players. Every team, Dundee United, everybody knows what they were like. Hibs, Hearts, they had all really John Robertson, your John Collins, players like that. The level of football, and I believe in the time I was at Dunfermline, was a really good standard. Definitely.
And after about 14 games, we were not sitting top of the league.
I remember we had a party. Leish had a party in the East End Park one after training. We had a big cake and I'm doing with beers and stuff, but they had a party to celebrate Dunfermline being top of the Premier League. and why not?
Why not, exactly? Yeah. One question I asked George O'Boyle on a recent podcast was there a feeling with that group of players and sitting top of the league after quarter of the season that you guys could achieve anything, or was it always the aim is just to stay in this league?
I honestly can't remember getting targets set. I think we knew we'd never win the league, obviously, with the teams that were in it, but we certainly didn't have an inferiority complex, and it was guys like George and Istvan and Big Norrie that made sure that you didn't feel we didn't belong at that level, that we deserved to play at that level, and and I think that was a big part of Leish's mindset, that we had to believe that we deserved to be playing at that level, and I think for the next couple of years anyway that we did.
Yeah, definitely.
And that was without, if the teams I've mentioned all had international based players. We didn't. We only had George and Istvan really. The rest of us were all journeymen, if you like. I think that's a horrible statement. Journeymen were better than that, but we weren't sprinkled with internationalists, whereas all the other teams seemed to have.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier we had some unreal results that season. Beating Celtic, beating Rangers, but one iconic game that supporters still talk about is the 5-1 against St Mirren and the Kozma hat trick. Now you came on for Kozma in that game. So no pressure.
No pressure. No, I think here's me going on thinking the fans were giving me a standing ovation going on, but no, it was. I think Istvan just everything he touched that day turned to gold, and I think we maybe won each at half time. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, he's gone on. He scored a hat trick, and I think if he hadn't already endeared himself to the fans, that certainly put him into celebrity status at Dunfermline.
Yeah,
and
100%.
His touch and his vision was just great to play with, and you just had to admire how good a footballer he was, and it saddens me when I read about his move to Liverpool and how he's voted one of the worst signings at Liverpool. I think that's not fair. He wasn't a bad footballer. He was a top player, maybe at the wrong time at Liverpool, but for Dunfermline, well, his mural's still up in the.
Yeah,
I think
cult
it's still
hero
there anyway. Aye, so.
Yeah, still there. So we finished that season, and then season 90-91, you make 36 appearances. So you do well again. But the big talking point that summer is when Big Jim's removed from his job. What's your memories of that? And Ian Munro obviously coming in.
That was bizarre. It really was. And I think Ian, having spoken to him years later, I think he probably admitted they got it wrong, because for me anyway, Jim Leishman and Ian Munro was a perfect combination. Ian was a top coach, he really was. Jim, I say I'm not being critical of him, Jim wasn't a coach. Jim was a motivator, he was a figurehead, he was Mr. Dunfermline. But I think Ian maybe felt he didn't get the credit for the amount of work he put in terms of coaching the players. But anyway, that summer, we were on pre-season, we were actually in Ireland at Portadown. And I remember Jim and Ian had to leave the training camp to come back to Dunfermline for a board meeting. And the players, we were left to our own devices. And of course, you imagine what 20 footballers are doing in Portadown and there's no manager. And I think I remember going golfing. I think a load of us went golfing. I think Ross Jack went fishing. And I mean, we didn't let ourselves down. We weren't getting drunk and stuff, but we were left our own devices. Obviously, not knowing what was going on until I think the following day we were told that Leish had left, or he was moving upstairs. I think that was the initial. I think that was the initial appointment. He was moving upstairs, and Ian was going to be first team manager.
Did it cause
a bit of friction? Yeah. I remember actually Jimmy Nicholl and some of the senior players were asked to write down who we wanted as manager.
Wow.
That was an instruction from the board. And
incredible.
I remember myself, Ray Farningham and Norrie all refused to sign. We wouldn't sign the paper and say who we wanted. And Jimmy, to be fair to Jimmy, he was put in an awkward spot, but he respected our decision. We didn't want to, and I think it was wrong of the club to expect the players to choose who they wanted as manager. And I think that,
crazy.
To me, that was the start of the kind of, not a decline as such, but that season, it was a tough season, although it was probably the best season I had personally as a player at Dunfermline. I think that was the start of a bit of a decline for the club. I think history will show this. We stayed up that year. We
finished 8th that season.
Yeah, and then I'm not saying, but a few of us left after that. End of that season, myself, Ray, Ross Jack, Paul Smith. I think Westy as well. I think there was a good number of players left the club. And I remember Jockey Scott took over after that. I'm sure it was Jockey Scott took over when they got rid of Ian. I think I remember Jockey Scott saying to Ray Farningham actually that they should never let that group of players go at that time.
Why do you think Ian Munro let so many of you guys go? Did he feel you were Leishman guys?
Probably. I think that. And again, I got on okay with Ian, although I think I had to prove myself time and time again with Ian. I remember getting Player of the Year. I presented on the pitch against, I think it was Celtic, and I wasn't even playing. You know, I'm like, but I think Ian did feel that group of players are probably Leish's signings. And I think the turnover of players at that point, that probably was the group that were left that Leish had brought in. So, because Big John had gone as well. I think Norrie had actually gone out on loan to Ayr United for a spell as well.
Correct, yeah.
You know, I can't ever imagine Norrie not being in the Dunfermline team, but there was a spell. And so that group, I think Ian probably, and I can understand now looking back, I think he wanted to put his own stamp on the club, get the players, the type of players he wanted into the club, but obviously that season, the following season, just didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
after he got sacked, Jockey came in, but although they got to the cup final, they got relegated as well. I'm sure if I remember right.
Yeah, correct. It was just a chaotic couple of years, wasn't it? And the crowds go from 11,000 home gate to half.
We hope you're enjoying this episode of Walking Down the Holbeath Road. We would also like to thank our sponsors at Inverkeithing Hillfield Swifts 2017s. The Swifts are an SFA quality marked community group and have competitive teams for every age group from mini kickers through to amateur level football. So if you're interested in youth football, why not check out their website, www.swiftsfc.com.
But what I was going to touch on was, obviously you've mentioned him a fair bit in this podcast, but Big Leish, what's your, you got any stories about Big Leish, or what is your abiding memory of working for Jim?
Just how he made you feel. If you felt down, if I remember driving it, I know that I was Sharpie would let me feel I was down, but if you weren't playing and you're driving to training and you're like, as soon as you walked in, Big Leish was just there with a big grin on his face, and just his methods were quite straight, quite simple methods, but very effective. I think after I left, and I'll come back to, I'll just go off on a bit of a tangent, but I moved to Thistle after Dunfermline, and I had another manager of similar ilk, John Lambie. And the two of them, people will argue they're the coaches, but see the success that both of those managers had. It was incredible. Yeah. Leish won umpteen promotions, champions, and John Lambie was the same, but go back to Leish, he just made you feel good about yourself, you know, and he took all your worries away, and he just made you feel that you had a place at the club, even if you weren't playing. Mm-hmm. And some of his antics, I remember some of the players will tell you don't always remember games as much as you remember your trips away with the boys at the end of the season. And I remember going to Tenerife, and Leish was there, and I was struggling to get there because my wife at the time, she wanted to go on holiday, but it kind of clashed with the boys' holiday. And I said to Leish, look, I don't think I'll be able to go. And he's like, I'll sort it. So he phoned up my wife and said, listen, I believe Davie might not be able to come. He says he needs to come. He's got signing talks. We're having all our signing talks when we're in Tenerife. Never a signing talk in place, but you know, he would do things like that for you. And he was on that trip. I remember he disappeared for 3 days. Never saw him. And I remember he came in one night. We're sitting, all the boys are sitting around the hotel lobby, and Leish walks in. And he said, I've been at a rave, lads, up in the mountains. I got lost. And it was just typical Leish. You know, Ian Monroe's sitting shaking his head, and Big Leish is bouncing about with the shades and the shorts on. He says, it's great, lads, it's great. That was his favourite word, great.
Superb. He's not changed. He's not changed. I've been to Magaluf a few times with him, so he's definitely not changed.
No, I think my two children, I've met him in their
of course,
their profession, and they just said exactly like as you say. He's never changed. He's just such a brilliant guy. He really is.
Is there any team talks that kind of stand out for you? Because he's well known for his motivational team talks. And
you put me on the spot. I remember one team talk that he obviously had it prearranged. Do you remember Trevor Smith? Trevor was another good player. Trevor travelled with Raymond and I because we all kind of lived in the Stirling area, so we used to travel together. But anyway, I remember Trevor had been sent off the week before. I think it was, I can't remember who, maybe Aberdeen we were playing, but anyway, Trevor had been sent off, so he was suspended. And Leish had the team in and was sitting in the dressing room, and he's, right lad, sit down. He's got his blazer on with the badge. He's like, go down, thumping his chest. What's that, lads? What's that? And it's, boys are throwing random answers at him. That's your hat, Gaffer. Playing for the club, but your hat. No. What is it? And he went 5 or 6 responses. And eventually he says, I can't remember who the last person was. We'll say it was Norrie. He says, Norrie, what's that? And he's punching his chest. Norrie's like that. You're giving your all, Gaffer. No, is it F? And he brought this picture of Trevor Smith out his top pocket, threw it in the deck and says, it's that effing Trevor Smith that gets sent off last week. And if any of you get sent off this week, you'll be getting that as well. It's like, brilliant. And the boys are like just in stitches, but
again, just relaxes all you guys, if you're feeling a bit stressed. And
I remember him and Big Doug Rugley were having a set 2 at 1 half time, and they were still having a go, and the referee had already been in to get us out for the second half, and Leish and Doug are still at each other's throats, but I do remember another one that I'll quickly, we were playing Meadowbank, and Leish and Stuart Beattie had a bit of a disagreement at half time. And Leish started lunging, and the dressing room, as it always was, it was soaking wet. It was a wet day, so there was water and everything. And Leish slipped. And as he slipped, he's grabbed Stuart Beattie, and the two of them are rolling about on the dressing room floor, and everybody else trying to pull them apart. But they weren't fighting as such. They just happened to get entangled with each other. But it was, again, you went out laughing about it, and
mm-hmm.
I can't remember if we beat Meadowbank that day, but we certainly had a laugh. That's for sure.
Fantastic. And like we started on, you made your debut against Celtic. You then play your last game for the club against Celtic on the 13th of August 91. I take it you were in a position at that point, you were looking to leave, and were you frustrated?
I was frustrated. I wasn't looking to leave, to be honest. As I said to you, I think I'd won a number of Player of the Years that season that had just ended, and I came back really. One thing I would say, I'd kept myself fit, and I didn't drink. I made sure I was always at the front in the runs, and I prided myself on my fitness levels. Maybe technically wasn't the best, but I made sure I was the fittest. And I came back, and the writing was on the wall. And during the pre-season, and then I wasn't in the team, and I thought I'd gone from being Player of the Year to no getting a game. And then as soon as Ian Minogue phoned me and said that Partick Thistle were interested in you, I thought, well, why would I stay when you obviously don't want me? So
yeah. And
then I looked at it, I thought a lot of my colleagues that I'd mentioned earlier were leaving, and it wasn't the same feel. But I thought I had the courage of my own convictions. I thought, I'll go there, and although they were playing in the Championship, I thought the deal that John Lambie the deal that he had promised me, that's another story, but anyway.
we'll get on to John Lambie in a second.
The deal was a good enough, I wasn't losing. If we were winning, I wasn't losing money financially. So I thought, I'll drop down a level, and as I say, the promise of trying to get them back up, or the intentions of getting back up, I thought I'll give it a go, and it worked out perfectly for us. We get, unfortunately, Dunfermline, we changed places with Dunfermline. Dunfermline went down and Thistle came up. So
yeah,
it was. I don't like saying this because I've still got a lot of affection for Dunfermline, but it was actually personally, it was quite a satisfying feeling that I'd made that right decision to go to a club that were going up the way, and I thought, well, if I hadn't let us all go, Dunfermline might have stayed in that league, but
yeah, who knows what would have happened. Talking about your time at Dunfermline, kind of wrapping that up, you played 122 games, scoring 11 goals. So, any games or goals that really stand out for you that still stick in the memory?
Obviously, the one that we've mentioned previously is the one that had the most meaning for me, is scoring the winner at Forfar to get us Cripsley over the line. But I seem to have a knack of scoring against Aberdeen. I scored a couple of, I think 2 or 3 times against Aberdeen. I remember scoring at East End with a header from, felt like it was outside the box, but that's just my memory. It was talking to Istvan's crossed it and I've scored, and we went 1-up. But again, I don't know if you remember, but that was the night, I think, Ian Jess scored a hat-trick.
Yeah.
He absolutely ran riot that day. But the goal, it was on Sports Scene. That's probably why I remember it. It was on the telly, so that one sticks in my mind. But probably one disappointment, I wasn't prolific enough at that time. I know it was 11 and 120 odd games, but from a midfield player, I'd like to have scored more. But
one question I was going to ask you, Davie, a few fans I've spoken to who followed the club in that era felt that you were a bit of a boo boy for some supporters. Did you feel that at the time? Because the type of player you were.
I do remember, in fact, it was one of the goals. It was leading up to a score, but I remember we played Queen of the South in the League Cup early on in the season, maybe the second or third game, and I remember getting booed on, and I thought, to be honest, I hadn't had a great start to the season, and I'd been subbed and I get booed on. We were getting beat 1-0, and I went on that. My first touch, I think I scored actually with my first touch, and I remember as I scored, I fell. But as I fell, I got back up. I gave it the old to the crowd, and to be honest, that changed. After that, they got right on behind me, and that's the season I had. I ended up winning 3 or 4 Player of the Years. But there was that wee spell that I did feel I wasn't popular, but then I think back, if it wasn't me, it was someone else. You know, and
tough crowd.
I remember it was the first time I'd been booed in my career, and I did feel, I took it not my confidence, and I remember speaking to Leish about it, and he was right. He said it'll turn. You just have to dig in, and it will turn for you. And sure enough, I went and won a number of Player of the Year, Supporters Player of the Years, which was a great honour. And you know, I think I did leave the club. Probably at least I'd seen the best of me at that time.
Brilliant. And you mentioned you joined Partick Thistle in '91, and you spent 2 years there. So John Lambie, another great character of the game. So any funny stories about John? I'm sure there's plenty.
No, there's plenty. It's where do you start? I think one of the funniest was when, again, a team talk. We were playing Rangers, and John Lambie was very similar to Leish in some respects, but his language was a bit more colourful than Leish's was, to be honest. But we were playing Rangers, and he came in with the team, and he was going through the team. Right, here's Rangers team today. It's Gorham, and he went through the back four. Richard Gough, Terry Butcher. They got to the midfield, and they had what was Russia at the time. They had a Russian player in the middle of the park, and he could not say Mikhailichenko.
Yeah.
And he tried umpteen times, and they ended up saying, that Russian B, you know, and it was just so typical of John Lambie, that Russian. Anyway, moving on, and it was just quite, just his whole character, and that, along with the fact, before that, he'd already brought in a tray of 13, I think it was 30, 2 subs in those days, 13 champagne glasses with a bottle of champagne, and he's pouring champagne. Right, lads, this is a celebration. The first time I've played Rangers. I think it's a time to celebrate, you know, and the boys are like, of course, a few of them quite happy to have a drink of champagne, but it was just the bizarre things that he would do, you know. But again, like I said earlier, between Jim Leishman and John Lambie, they must have a huge amount of successes and promotions and championships. You know,
fantastic. So. Yeah, you spend 2 years at Thistle, and then you move to St Johnstone. So, what's your memories of playing up at St Johnstone? Obviously, there was a period where St Johnstone and Dunfermline were battling for the first division.
Yeah, it didn't work out for me initially because on my debut, I ruptured my Achilles tendon 20 minutes into my debut against Dundee United, and I missed the whole season. I think Jeff Brown will still be cursing me. I think they paid $100,000 for me, and that was a lot of money in those days. And I never kicked a ball and unfortunately for St Johnstone, we actually got relegated at the end of that season, which was gutting for me, not having kicked a ball and not be able to do anything about it. But yeah, that meant we were playing in the first division as it was. With Dunfermline, they were there as well. So I remember having a few battles against Dunfermline. Actually, I got concussed at East End Park one game playing for St Johnstone. I remember coming to in the dressing room and I was asking the boys what was the score, and they were like, "Tell me where to go. Don't be what you on about." I honestly couldn't remember. We got beat 2-1, and I could not remember what the score. I remember coming to, and it's like a bizarre feeling that I could not remember anything about the game. But
I think that's
funny the number of players that I played with St Johnstone and Dunfermline. There was quite a number.
I was going to touch on there. That I think that game you're speaking about was George O'Boyle's first game back at East End Park after he had controversially left the club. So we spoke to George recently, who's got a lot of fond memories from his time at Dunfermline. But what was George like as a player, especially obviously your time at St Johnstone?
George, I did listen to that podcast, and it was really interesting. I didn't realise how difficult it had been for George at that time. Football's quite a selfish sport, and you just look after yourself, and as long as you're all right, kind of thing. Although it's a team game, it's still quite selfish, and I didn't really think too much about it until I listened to George on the podcast, and then it took me back to that time, and I'm thinking, well, I was going back, and I was fine. The fans were okay with me, but then I thought, well, they probably were okay with me because George was playing. Because George was a top player for, as we said earlier, for Dunfermline, and I know he didn't particularly want to leave. And St Johnstone at that time, I think Billy Dodds had gone from St Johnstone to Aberdeen, and I know Paul Sturrock was a big fan of George. And I remember it was on, it was off, it was on, it was off, and then because being at St Johnstone, the players were asking me what he was like, and I said, "Oh, he's a top player." And but eventually, when he did come and he settled in that game at East End Park, he came in for some stick. But I'm sure George will realise it's only because he was so good for Dunfermline that the fans just hated the thought of him playing for someone else.
Exactly. I think as a Dunfermline supporter, Davie, seeing him going to St Johnstone and having the next 3 seasons were probably the best of his career, and just thinking that could have been with Dunfermline is really frustrating as a supporter.
I know, but I remember playing with George. It was a league. I'm sure we played. It was Wraith Rovers. It was at Kirkcaldy, but I think we were playing Cowdenbeath in the cup tie. And that night, George got a horrendous injury. And I remember going over when he was on the deck. And I remember going over to see if he was all right. And the gash on his knee, I literally could see the bone in his knee. It was a horrendous injury. And I'm quite sure if George had avoided the injuries that he got at Dunfermline, no disrespect to St Johnstone, he wouldn't have gone sideways to St Johnstone. He'd have gone up the way to, I don't know. I think even Rangers. I think he could have played at Rangers. Billy Dodds, who was a top player in my opinion, George was as good as Billy Dodds, if not better. Having played with the two of them, I think George could have played at Rangers. Billy did, and Billy had a great career, obviously, and he was a good player. But I think George was as good as Billy.
Definitely. Well, you're at St Johnstone till 1996. Now, talking about 1996, we mentioned him a fair bit earlier, but obviously Norrie McCarthy passes away that January. What's your memories, and how did you find out the news about Norrie?
Well, you probably don't know this actually. I was playing for St Johnstone in the reserve game the Monday night of when Norrie died. The end of the game, I'd been injured. Westie was in goals. I remember walking up towards Westie, who was picking his gloves and that up after the final whistle, and Dick Campbell had ran onto the pitch. And they got to Westy before me, and I could just see him, Dick Campbell, holding Westy's head and telling him something. And as I got there, Westy looked at me and said to me, "Norrie's dead." And I could not believe it. So, ironically, I was back at East End Park when I heard the news. And it was in the days before mobile phones and everything. And I remember going home absolutely just numb. And I phoned Ray Farningham. Ray was at Dundee, I think, at that point. And I phoned Ray to tell him. And again, he couldn't believe it. And it was one of those moments that I'll never, ever forget.
Mm-hmm.
It was quite ironic, as I said, that I was back at East End Park when I heard the news. It's just one of these moments that you just can't believe has happened.
Without a doubt. I think even to this day, Davie's he's obviously a sad loss, and he'll never be forgotten. Never will be, and quite rightly so. And I know Dunfermline fans will keep that memory going for generations to come. And it was just, as I said at the start of our chat, he was the one guy that just, when I think of Dunfermline, even now, the first person I think about is Norrie, and that's before Leish. That he was just an incredible guy. He had so much time for everybody. I was quite a shy guy when I came to the club, and Norrie made sure I was all right. He would always be checking up on players. He used to phone me, even when I left Dunfermline, we kept in touch. We'd phone each other, and he was just a huge, huge loss to, first and foremost, his family, but also obviously the fans in the club and the town as well. Yeah.
The town, yeah.
Yeah. So you leave St Johnstone in '96 and you return to Clydebank, one of your first clubs. You then have a spell at Annan, and then in 2002, a club I want to touch on. I spoke to Davie Bingham in length about this. Your time at Gretna, the real fairy tale at Gretna. So, wow, where do you start?
Well, where do you start? The most bizarre thing was that I came out of retirement and began playing again at 40-odd-year-old. A full-time footballer. I don't think there's many people have been offered a full-time playing contract at 40-odd-year-old. And I think that in itself told you the way this story was going to go. It was just bizarre. But and I know he got a lot of criticism, and I think some of it's unjust, some of it I accept. But Brooks Mylson was one of the most amazing guys I've ever met in my life. He was such a generous individual. He just loved his football. He was totally committed to the club. Obviously, things ended the way it did, but for that period, up into including when we got promoted to the Premier League, it was just, the club was only going one way. We didn't have any setbacks. It was just promotion after 3 consecutive promotions. And I'll say to people, Rangers couldn't even do that. Rangers fell at the final hurdle, but Gretna could get 3 successive promotions. Okay, it became a bit of a laughing stock towards the end of that season, but to get to 3 successive promotions, a Scottish Cup, play in Europe, all in the space of kind of 7-8 years that I was there, it was just incredible.
Proper fairy tale, wasn't it?
It was, and I think we went from everybody's favourite to everybody hated us, that kind of thing. But as I said to people, you look at the number of, we're talking about Dunfermline. Dunfermline went into administration. Motherwell, Dundee, Hearts, Hibs, they've all gambled and failed. But Gretna, for whatever reason, they seem to get really criticised for the way they went about their business. And people will argue they bought their way up the leagues, and to some extent they possibly did. But I think the boys, like you mentioned, Davie Bingham was a top footballer. Yeah, he was a top player, brilliant footballer. Davie Bingham would take that as an insult if somebody said they bought their way up the leagues, because some of his performances were incredible. You know,
and big Kenny Duker up front as well, who
Big
scored
Kenny
some
was
amount of goals.
Oh, what a career he had. He ended up playing in the MLS. You know, and on the back of scoring at Ibrox, just as a club went into administration. But that just summed Kenny's career up. It was just, you know, upwards every season just got better for him. But he was playing with good players, and he'd be the first to admit that.
Yeah. So after Gretna, you then have a wee cameo at Threave Rovers, and you become the oldest player in Scottish football. How did that all come about? Why did you get back into playing?
I remember when I lost my job at Morton, I'd gone, once Gretna went into administration, I got the manager's job at Morton, and that lasted just a year and a bit. When I got sacked, I thought, what am I going to do? And Threave asked if I'd like to come and do a bit of coaching, but I wasn't really up for it. But I said, I'll come and play, thinking they'd see it as a joke. But they took me up on that and ended up going to play, and had a great wee spell there. And we got into the Scottish Cup qualifying, and we got Stenhousemuir, ironically enough, in I think it'd be the third round. So we went to Ochilview, and I was playing midfield. I became the oldest player to play in the Scottish Cup. But I think there's an even more bizarre link to this. So the game ended 2-2, and that was kind of early December. But that winter was one of the worst winters we'd had. Remember the real bad snow?
Yeah, I do.
So the game,
was that the Beast from the East and all that as well?
Aye. The game was postponed, I think, up maybe 12 times because the game, just the weather was that bad. However, in between the first game and the replay, I then became manager of Stenhousemuir. So I went from playing for Threave in the first game to managing Stenhousemuir in the replay. I think that my record maybe I'll get broken as the oldest player, but I don't think that record of playing for one team and managing the other team, I don't think that'll ever happen. Bizarre.
No, definitely not. You touched on your spell at Morton as manager and obviously Stenhousemuir. When you retired, from playing or look towards the end of retiring, were you always interested in being a coach and becoming a manager, or was it something that just kind of happened? It
kind of just happened. My first experience of coaching, I'd left when my first retirement. I joined the SFA as a development officer, so I got into coaching, albeit kids level, but I did all my badges, and with that in mind, I thought if I ever got a chance, I'd like to give it a go. And so when I went to Annan, non-league, when I moved back to Dumfries, again, I was only there a couple of weeks, and the manager gets sacked. So being an ex-player that had played at a decent level, they thought I would be the perfect guy to take the club on, and had a great wee spell at Annan, and that gave me a real hunger for coaching. And then when the whole Gretna thing came about, is because they asked me to go as a player coach. So I went and played, and I had the best of both worlds. I was playing and coaching, and I had a really good relationship with Rowan Alexander for that period of time. And then unfortunately, Rowan, things started to go belly up, and Rowan got sacked, and I got asked to take over, and I got us over the line to the Premier League, but trying to keep us there was pretty much impossible. But to answer your question, I had that real burning desire to see what I could do as a coach. Ultimately, I failed at a few clubs in terms of, you're getting the sack, but I keep convincing myself if Alex Ferguson and Jose Mourinho can get sacked, then anybody can get sacked, and it is becoming a job where there's no, how long do you get? It's just so difficult. I know it's a different league, but there's Watford sacked their manager again after 12 games, and you think Graham Alexander at Motherwell get sacked before they even kicked the ball in the Premier League this year, and you think, what chance have these guys got?
Is it something that still interests you, getting back into coaching and managing, or is it something that you're quite happy to leave it for now?
I'd love to try to get another go at it, but I'm realistic enough to know it'll probably never happen. I'm scouting for Motherwell at the moment. I do match reports for the opposition, so I'm watching Premier League games every week, and it's given me a different view on the game. You know, I'm slightly removed from whatever game I'm going to, so there's no stress. So I'm watching the game from a different perspective, and I think it's adding to my education. But whether I'll ever get another chance to use that, I very much doubt. But I would love to try it again. But I had a spell at Stennismuir, which was probably the hardest time in my life in terms of the COVID and trying to run a football team and no training facilities, no dressing rooms. I thought it was harsh to get judged on that one season where we played 18 games in about the space of 3 months. You know, we're playing Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday. Dunfermline would be the same. It was just,
of course,
there was no fun. There was no pleasure in that. But to be judged on that, I thought it was a wee bit harsh. But any manager gets sacked, I'll tell you that is harsh, isn't it? But,
of course. And you thought going to Bordeaux on a bus was hard enough. But that kind of leads us on nicely to what is Davie Irons doing these days?
I'm a police officer based down in Lockerbie, which probably most people in the world will have heard of Lockerbie for a very unfortunate event. But I'm working in Lockerbie as a community officer, and I work closely with the schools, so I really enjoy my job. As I say, I'm based down here, but along with that, I've got that wee part-time role with Motherwell as a opposition scout. So
brilliant. Do you get recognised, Davie, when you're in your police job?
I do actually. It's quite nice actually to get noticed. In fact, a couple of the games I've had to help police. One Dunfermline game a couple of seasons ago, I was in the away end and I get noticed by a number of people, and then Dunfermline scored. We were celebrating, we were throwing my hat up, and it was lovely. It was really nice.
Superb.
But I think I've changed. My two older kids are they're both in the media, and my daughter in particular is she's gone from being Davie Irons' daughter. I'm now Amy Irons' dad. So it's So no, it's still nice that people remember you. I don't know how much longer that'll go on for, but it gives you a wee warm feeling that people obviously remember you. As I must have had some kind of impact on their lives that they do remember me. You know,
you'll always be remembered at East End, and you're welcome any time as well, Davie.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Just to wrap this one up, we do a top 5 at the end of the podcast. So this applies to your time at the Pars only. So we'll start off the most memorable game you can remember.
It has to be the game against Meadowbank at home when we won promotion. That was the first championship I'd ever won, and it's still my favourite moment in football, winning promotion with Dunfermline. I was going to say I've still got the medal, but I put the medal in my dad's coffin when he died, and that shows how, and that meant so much to me. And I know how much it meant to my dad. He used to love coming to East End Park. He'd drive up from Dumfries every Saturday, every alternative Saturday. So that game, without doubt, is my most memorable with Dunfermline.
Superb, good choice. Who was your best mate during your time at the club?
It was Raymond Sharp initially, because we travelled together and we had some crazy moments. Raymond loved his fast cars, and I've had a few scary moments with Ray. I remember coming back from Paisley at Love Street. He had a wee Renault 5 Turbo, but he got it chipped, which meant it was an absolute flying machine. And we coming on the motorway, we hit a lorry wheel that was, you couldn't see it, and it literally hit it. We bounced, and as we hit the deck, the whole roof caved in. And honestly, it was an unbelievable moment. We're stuck in the middle of the motorway with this Renault 5 Turbo basically caved in. And Sharpie's all he's bothered about is his car. I'm like, never mind the car, we're stuck in the middle of the motorway. But
some character,
certainly Ray Sharpie initially, but it's gone on to be Ray Farningham since probably halfway when Ray joined. We just hit it off, and to this day, I'd still regard him as one of my best friends in football. He's a top guy. He was a top player, and I maybe didn't see the best of him at Dunfermline, but we both went to Thistle as part of the deal, and we had a successful period there. And Ray's gone into coaching, and he was a top coach. I think he was unfortunate he never got the recognition he deserved either. But between Ray Sharp and Ray Farmingham, they're my two mates.
Superb, mate. Brilliant. Who was the best player you played against?
Best player I ever played against, this might be a bit of a random one, but Trevor Stephen for Rangers, who, I don't know, people might not remember, he actually went to Marseille for some £4 or £5 million. But
was he not an England international?
He was an England international, and I just used to have nightmares because Trevor Stephen and Gary Stephen played on the right hand side for Rangers, and Gary Stephen was one of the fittest players, I think, at Rangers, and he just used to bomb. He was, before they had the overlapping fullbacks, he was an overlapping fullback, and between the two of them, they used to just give me water in the brain. It was like, he was, I think, one of the best players I've ever played against. I could have mentioned Souness and Paul McStay, John Collins, but for pure, even just being on the pitch and just not being able to cope with him, it was Trevor Stephen.
Fantastic. Your favourite stadium you played in?
Apart from East End Park, so you're talking away, I have to say, I would say Tynecastle for what it is now, but it wasn't like that when I was playing. But so my favourite stadium would probably be Pittodrie, because I scored twice up there for Dunfermline. So, and as I say, I think I scored at home as well. But I seem to play well at Pittodrie for some reason. So I'll go with Pittodrie for that one.
Superb. And final one, your one favourite memory from your time at the club?
The final whistle at 10-5 on that day in 1989 when we got promotion, and the fans streaming on the pitch, getting engulfed with the fans, waiting for the celebrations, getting presented the trophy, and that night, I'll live with me forever. It was just, as I said at the start, Mikey, that Dunfermline has got a big part of my life, and I'll never forget my time there. The people were brilliant. I loved it. I've got nothing but positive memories of Dunfermline, but that day it meant the world to us all. My biggest regret is they never had a reunion for the league winning team. I know COVID and that's struck, but it'd have been nice for a 30-year reunion. But I remember saying that.
There's time yet, mate. There's time yet.
Well, if you can pull a few strings, Mikey,
leave it with me.
I will.
Top man. Davie, thanks very much for doing the podcast. That's been a fantastic hour and a half. Really appreciate your time. And like I say, you're welcome back to East End any time, so please let us know if you'd like to come back to a match.
Oh, I'd love to. And as I say, I really appreciate you. Even to be chosen to be part of a Dunfermline podcast is a big thrill, because, for all hundreds of players that have played before and after me, it's nice to be remembered. And as I say, I appreciate you taking the time, Mikey, to contact me and give me the opportunity to have a chat. So thanks very much, mate. And here's hoping Dunfermline can get promotion this year.
Fingers crossed, mate. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Davie.
Pleasure, Mikey.
Thank you for listening. Remember to subscribe to this podcast, which is available on all popular platforms such as Apple iTunes, Spotify and Google Podcasts. Thanks as always to our guests in this episode of Walking Down the Holbeath Road. This podcast was produced by Jan Motkiewicz and music supplied by Stuart Dusty Miller. We look forward to speaking to another former par in the next episode.